Here's the real situation. If Trump had reached an agreement with Iran, it wouldn't have been in Israel's interests. Israel needed war. Israel needed strikes. Therefore, Israel didn't need any negotiations. That's all there is to it. Because the negotiating process, well, there was no way the collapse of the Iranian state, so to speak, could have happened. And that's exactly what Israel is counting on. That's why Israel is actually against negotiations. And I'm absolutely certain, so to speak, that Israel did everything to ensure that the negotiations, yes, would not have led to success. Why? Because if they had led to success, there would have been no strikes on Iran. And Israel wanted and wants strikes on Iran. Therefore, sometimes, so to speak, big people think that no one around them understands anything, no one sees anything, no one sees anything, everyone speaks. But in reality, sometimes certain stories there have a psychological underpinning. They're just written on their foreheads, so to speak, like a running line. That's all there is to it. Not because I, for example, am somehow, so to speak, insightful, but because it's a mundane story, I would even say. A mundane story. Everything's clear, yes. Israel needed a war, so any negotiations, yes, were not acceptable to them, and therefore it would have been disadvantageous for them from the very beginning if Trump had agreed on something. And after that, Trump can say whatever he wants about how it was all him, it was me. Yes, he already looks a bit, so to speak, like a fool here, to be honest. Yes, yes. That's why, in any case, it seems to me the role of the Zionist gentleman here is very serious. And they are in his circle, they are open, so to speak. Yes, they don't even hide their own there. As for Trump's vanity, well, listen, a bust was spotted in his office. There's one like that in America. In America, so to speak, there's a Mount Rushmore. It has these enormous heads of founding fathers carved into the stones. And Trump, you see, has a bronze, so to speak, replica of these guys in his office, from that Mount Rushmore, with his own Trump head. Here it is, right there. People are already singing its praises. Today, an article came out, so to speak, in some American publication. I've already forgotten, so to speak. You can't sort it out in these dumps, so to speak. Or maybe my memory is failing me due to age. I don't know. But this is where this local Jeep, so to speak, says, look, Trump, he'll be on the list of, so to speak, great American presidents. Roosevelt, who crushed, Soviet Germany. Reagan, who, it turns out, was what extremist Lindsey Graham was saying. It was Lindsey Graham when he compared Netanyahu and Trump. Yeah, sure is. Who wasn't talking about this article. Some columnist wrote today. He was saying, well, Roosevelt, who defeated Reagan, who it turns out defeated Soviet communism, and Reagan, it turns out won. I didn't know that, to be honest. And now Trump will defeat, so to speak, tyrannical Islamism. That's all. And he'll be just as great, so to speak. That's all. That's the song. You see, it's clear that in this context, yes, well, Trump admits that he's there, speed up Tel Aviv, so to speak. Yes, you smoke, drink wine and beer, you're Tel Aviv's accomplice. Like, yes, that's the very thing that Tel Aviv conned him. Like, yes, and forced him to do it. He, of course, can't. Yes, he can't agree to that. Well, and so it seems to me that's where all these approaches come from. They're quite simple. They're quite simple, I must say. This is precisely about this mess. Like, yes, this Graham understands, doesn't understand, so to speak. By the way, in my opinion, Lindsey Graham, he was also some kind of tech, I heard. That's it. But if not direct, then indirect, that's for sure. If not active, then passive. That's 100%. But these statements of his, you see, it's precisely about this mess in my head. Yes, because, I repeat it again, yes, Jews have lived in Iran for centuries. They practice their religion, and no one bothers them there. Although, you see, Grimm, I'm sure he doesn't even know anything about this. Well, although, so to speak, according to Grimm, they should have been there a long time ago. They should have been cut into belt, so to speak, yes, and everything else. So, and yet on the one hand, this is not so. On the other hand, regarding the murders and everything else, listen, well, it's not the Americans, so to speak, who should be moralizing here. Yes, there are funerals taking place in Iran. 170 who died in an attack, either Israeli or American, yes, on a girls' school. Yeah. But this is a terrible, so to speak, crime. This is a catastrophic crime. Who was hiding in that school? What was there, yes, so to speak? Yes. Why did this happen? 170 or 171, I don't remember. Yes, girls. Yeah. Girls, so to speak, yes, died. For what, so to speak? Why? Because Bibi Netanyahu, so to speak, yes, and this Trump, so to speak, yes, they are, liberators from Iranian radicalism. Yes. By the way, yes, that's the first thing. Secondly, regarding the Americans, according to some data, about 500,000 died during the American operation in Iraq. As for, by the way, Iranian radicalism, by the way, yes, again, from the point of view of us Russians, yes, just, look, Iran has never, even during the most difficult periods of our history, when it would have been possible, yes, to play with these things, it has never engaged in promoting radicalism of any kind on the territory of Russia or the territory of the Soviet Union. Even now, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, when the war in the Caucasus began, well, yeah, the Iranians weren't there. The Iranians weren't there. They weren't involved. Although they could have been involved or something. And who was there? There were the Saudis, and then there were, so to speak, all those same Qataris, the Bahrainis, and then there were those Gulf monarchies, and then there were all sorts of other, so to speak, people who sponsor international terrorism. In reality, yes, this kind of Islamic extremism, yes, this kind of, but for some reason, these organizations they sponsor always work within the agenda of the Americans and Israel. They say they're fighting for true Islam, but for some reason in the end, it turns out they don't always work within the agenda of, so to speak, the CIA and Mossad. Even in relation to the Russian state, all these radicals, extremists, so to speak, yes, also the fundamentalists and so on, so to speak, yes, including those who are now pouring in huge numbers, so to speak, yes, as it were, from other regions, including the former post-Soviet ones, yes, so they are starting to stir things up here, stir things up, and so on, so on. Their goal is, yes, for example, to mitigate the destruction of the Russian state. This goal completely coincides with the goals of the West, Europe, the United States, and so on. Oh, what a strange coincidence. And it's exactly the same in other places. These are the people supporting the Iranians. Have you ever seen them here say, do you think they don't have means? Yes, of course they do. They could do the same there. Why not? Why not? But they are not here because of extremism and so on, right? And in general, the only thing regarding the role of Israel, so to speak, who pushed whom where? The only place that, yes, Iran was working on was Israel. That's all. And then he'll say, so to speak, yes, Israel has nothing to do with it, but all this is not true, so to speak. Yes, that's exactly it. That's exactly how it is, unfortunately, so to speak. But this is
information. For example, Carlson spoke here and said, that same Carlson who lives on the roof in the American one, he said that in the past 24 hours, I think Mossad's agents who were bringing explosions there were arrested in Bahrain and Qatar. Yes. And what kind of explosions were they, right? Maybe this is exactly the same situation, so to speak. That strange incident that occurred at the plant at the Saudi Arabian refinery, so to speak. Yes, in Saudi Arabia. Yes, because it is unclear who blew up that oil refinery. Yes. So the Americans say that Iran is doing this in order to draw Saudi Arabia into a war against Iran, even though their relations are complicated, Nevertheless, yes, there's a general opinion, so to speak, that the Israelis did it, that they launched the attack. So when Israel uses such methods, can we trust it? And can we even accept any information about casualties on Israeli territory? I think we just need to understand a simple truth here. We shouldn't judge people by ourselves. It's clear that, so to speak, things in our world are quite complicated, including in these countries we're talking about. And I'm not idealizing Iran at all, romanticizing it, yes. Nevertheless, it would seem, yes, such statements, yes, they are simply, well, so to speak, disgusting. Yes, regarding those killed, yes, they reveal the inner state of those people who say this, because in fact, apparently, are not speaking, but about people in general. Yes, perhaps Israel would have acted in this way, yes. But also because of this, it would seem, yes, they are developing, so to speak, an opinion that this could be like this. This is how things are. This is how things, although it is clear that around any war, so to speak, of course, there's always a buildup of this. The committee tyranny, Bashiri there, propaganda, and so on, so to speak. But here, as far as I understand, it would seem, yes, this is so, again, so to speak, right? Take Iraq, did the Americans not kill a huge number of people there, or does that also need to be verified? And how can you verify? Go to the scene, or go ahead. Those in Israel who say we need to check things out, well, go to Iran and check it out. We'll pack up and go. It's, pretty much the same as our whole situation with Crimea, and then with Donbass. Yes, when we read in the foreign press, including the Israeli press, by the way, yes, including the Israeli press, that the situation in Crimea is in fact terrible, so to speak, that in Donbass, everything is in fact a nightmare, and so on and so forth. So, when we read these things, so to speak, and I invited a foreign journalist to come and check it out, yes, they either refused to check it out, or even when they came, they kind of said, yes, look, everything is basically fine here. They returned home, and in their wonderful, so to speak, free, so to speak, publications, they wrote exactly the opposite. It's exactly the opposite. Yes. And so I want to say to the gentlemen of Israel, have you not noticed, for example, that in Ukraine, Bendir's ideology is yes, yes, strive. And how is it that you have such, so to speak, double optics? Yes, there's something wrong with your heads. Therefore, it seems to me that you're talking about yourself when they say this, they're talking about themselves. About themselves, yes. And this, in my opinion, must also be taken into account. In any case, yes, it seems to me that the crime, so to speak, is obvious. That's how it is.